As the batch fly into Camino, we notice that Crosshair is still wearing a little something something. This is a great way to show us visually that loyalty to the Empire is still at the forefront of Crosshair's mind. My boy is obsessed, especially with the idea that Hunter might be a traitor. Crosshair's loyalty to the batch has essentially been forcibly removed, and in its place is now unquestionable loyalty to the galaxy's greatest evil. And since the Order is so fresh in his mind, he hasn't had the time to really contemplate these newfound loyalties. They simply are, though he is annoyed at the way Hunter is not taking them seriously. However, he is able to resist the worst of the chip's effects. When they come off the ship, there are regs all around, and if Crosshair had been under the full influence of the chip, he would have branded the batch as traitors and demanded they be taken into custody. Compared to the manic behavior that we know the chip can bring out in clones, Crosshair is quite docile in this moment. The further we get from that initial moment when the chip activates, the more self-aware Crosshair becomes. This sudden loyalty to the Empire is beginning to clash with everything he is as a person, and this is reasonably stressing him out. I mean, just look at him immediately reach for what is essentially an analog for a cigarette. Though Crosshair is beginning to become cognizant of his inconsistencies, he is still going to defend his position, even if he hasn't fully comprehended where that position has come from. Which, yeah, is indulging in a whole lot of copium. So he begins by trying to get Hunter to admit that he was the one who was wrong. Because if Hunter is wrong, then following Order 66 was a normal, insane thing to do, and Crosshair's problems are easily solved, but it turns out that they're not easily solved because Hunter is 100% correct here, and Crosshair knows it, and he's angry now because he's starting to remember that he's never been an Order follower guy. And then he's further reminded of something that makes him even angrier. The narrative that the Jedi are all settled traitors and the clones need to drop everything and kill them all is insane, and only a pre-programmed reg would follow such an order. But if Crosshair feels that the order is reasonable, then that means he is like the pre-programmed regs, and if Crosshair is a reg, he can't be a member of the Bad Batch. And if he isn't a member of the Bad Batch, he doesn't have anywhere to belong, and if he has nowhere to belong, then what's his purpose? So when they go to the mandatory meeting, Crosshair leaves his helmet off. This is a choice he's making to separate himself from the regs. And yeah, he's still messed up by the chip, but he's starting down a path that would have returned him to his normal self. Because ultimately, the chip at its strength now can't override his loyalty to the Bad Batch. After the mandatory meeting, we meet the Bad Batch in the hallway. This scene shows us visually that Crosshair has resolved to try to re-merge his identity with the Bad Batch. He doesn't want to be a programmed reg, especially as he starts to see for himself what that looks like. And though keeping his helmet off is a small thing, the fact that it is off as compared to all the times it was on previously shows that he is making a mental effort to fight these feelings that are inside of him that don't make any sense. Because he is loyal to the batch first and foremost, and he'll work out all the Empire stuff some other time. That being said, Crosshair still is compelled by the chip, which is why he challenges Echo's remarks about being soldiers of the Republic. He's still trying to keep his standing with his brothers while also appeasing the demands made by the chip. But Tech's blunt response to this makes Crosshair realize that taking off his helmet is only one small step in overcoming this dissonance that's now between him and his brothers concerning the Empire. And there are going to continue to be problems and conflicts surrounding this as long as his brothers continue to speak out against something he feels compelled to defend. But all of this internal crisis gets interrupted by the most wonderful character in all existence. I don't care what you say, Omega is delightful. Crosshair's reaction to Omega is more significant than you might realize. At first he seems mildly annoyed, but also maybe a little bit relieved that he no longer has to think about why he's defending systemic genocide. But when Omega says his name, we get this beautiful little moment where his countenance softens.
I was wondering when you guys would come back.
You know who we are?
Hunter, Echo, Tech, Wrecker, and Crosshair. You're Clone Force 99.
And I'm not just on the Omega and Crosshair best friends forever copium. I mean, well, I am, but it's not just that. There is a very noticeable change. And I'm not saying that he's immediately like so taken with Omega and she's so adorable, but he's certainly touched by the fact that she even knows who he is. And while this is a precious moment that I could watch on loop for hours, it is not the beginning of the same kind of cute brother-sister relationship that the rest of the batch are going to enjoy with Omega. No, in fact, their relationship actually starts to deteriorate quite rapidly rapidly in the very next scene. The next scene we have is the lunchroom scene. And honestly, this just takes me right back to high school. The batch sit at their designated table, all alone, and we just get to see just how unsociable Wrecker is, just in general. He's shouting, he's slamming the table, he's drawing a lot of unwanted attention towards them. But let's be real, he's probably just not used to other people being around them. Him and Tech also have this really silly nothing argument. Their dynamic is very much the clashing neurodivergent duo. Wrecker is giving very ADHD, while Tech is portrayed to be more on the autistic spectrum. And this can be like water and oil. Someone with ADHD like Wrecker is going to express himself using a lot of hyperbole and exaggeration. He's going to get loud and bombastic because he wants his feelings validated, but Tech lacks the ability to pick up on this, and instead he just uses what he believes to be the most calm and relaxating thing he can think of, which is just hard facts and logic. We see Crosshair respond to this nothing argument by shaking his head in exasperation. It kind of gives me the feeling that he's tried to point this out to Tech and Wrecker, but no matter how many times he tries to explain it to them, they just end up going back to their old ways. It's nice to see Crosshair kind of resume a position as an older brother, or at least a parentified younger brother, and he's like, oh gosh, these two will not start arguing in front of the entire lunchroom. And it's not that he's embarrassed of them, he just doesn't want them to draw attention, and for a good reason. And then to add to the shenanigans, Omega shows up, and I will never recover from how hilarious this scene is, where they all just stare at her like she's an alien, which she pretty much is, because remember, they don't even know that she's a clone at this point. She's just some random girl who runs around with Nala Se and is suddenly inviting herself to sit with them at a lunch table. Like, what? But what a pleasant welcome she is, because immediately she starts saying things to them that they've probably never heard before. I like you. I want to stay with you. The fact that you're outcast in this army of clones is relatable to me. For some reason, they still don't quite catch on what this means, but they'll figure it out later. Meanwhile, Crosshair is definitely invested in what she's saying, but only because I think he's suspicious of her. There's the fact that she's associated with Nala Se, which is pretty weird, but she's also bringing up things that he doesn't really want to think about. She's like, hey, you guys are pretty cool because you don't fit in around here either. And then Crosshair is forcibly reminded of, well, when he did fit in a little bit more. And he goes into a full-on, like, PTSD catatonic moment. I mean, look at him play with this spoon. It's just kind of hovering in the air. Like, this man is a genetically altered sniper. He's not supposed to get distracted to the point where he forgets how to spoon. And this is just kind of bad news bears for his and Omega's relationship, because it begins to throw into sharp relief that Crosshair is showing a pattern of not fitting in with the rest of the batch, and Omega is showing them all how she does fit in with the Bad Batch, which can, in this moment of insecurity, look an awful lot like replacement. And maybe you're thinking, bro, Omega is just sitting at their table. But then the bullies show up, and they start to bully the batch, and I want to remind you of how quick Crosshair is to defend his brothers. This is something he's been doing their entire lives, and the pattern would appear to be that when Crosshair begins to aggress, Wrecker immediately comes to his aid, as we see from here in this scene from Season 7 of the Clone Wars. But this time, instead of Crosshair immediately jumping to their defense, it's Omega. She throws the first punch. Or rather, she throws this weird oblong burrito nutrition nugget that splatters on. I don't know what they're feeding these poor men. And to add salt to this wound, Wrecker stands up behind Omega to support her in starting this fight, which is something he would normally do after following Crosshair's lead. When I first saw this episode, it was really unusual to me that Crosshair didn't immediately participate in the fighting, and I thought it was a result of the chip, but after thinking about it, I think that's him being really petty towards Omega. Oh, what's this? She started a fight? Well, he's not going to engage in it because she's not one of them. Which is why he doesn't really do anything until Echo's butt lands in his food, and at last it gets personal enough for him to engage. Omega just happened to walk into Crosshair's life at the exact wrong time. How is she supposed to know that he was having this insane identity crisis and that her presence was making him feel even more alienated from the rest of his brothers for something as simple as starting a food fight when that should have been his job? So unfortunately for Omega, it's not going great between her and Crosshair. Crosshair isn't just gonna instantly become more secure. I mean, you've seen the rest of this show. It doesn't get any better from here. I would also like to take this moment to point out that this scene in the infirmary Crosshair may sound like he's trying to hurt Echo's feelings, but just look at this man's face. It's the most endearing face I've ever seen on him in my life. Like, sure, he's poking fun at maybe a sensitive topic, but that's just kind of how Crosshair rolls. And anyway, you need to hold on to these precious moments because we know it doesn't get better from here. Crosshair goes through a lot of ups and downs in the next few scenes, but one of those moments is definitely an up for him when Hunter brutally rejects Omega. He doesn't mince words. He says, "Stay away from us. We're no good for you." Crosshair's probably thinking, well, that's that. No more little blonde girl trying to shoehorn her way in. Crosshair has one less thing to worry about. He's even feeling enough like himself to properly scowl at the regs that interrupt the batch on their way to get reprimanded. However, after Admiral Tarkin's name is dropped, Crosshair loses his sass and instead adopts a neutral expression. Now, before you tell me that I'm reading too much into expressions, first of all, how dare you? And second of all, look at the shift in Echo's face as well. Look at the angry eyebrows that come out. He's angry to hear Tarkin's name again and have to acknowledge his existence and listen to his orders. I also want you to take a look at this interaction here. When Wrecker elbows Tech, Crosshair looks at him with a "bro, cut that out there watchy" look. Either Crosshair is wary of the lack of discipline this displays, or he's anxious over the fact that Wrecker said out loud that they as a squad have been talking smack about the Empire. Or maybe it's a little bit of both. Although the simulation is ordered by the Empire and they are using it to challenge the value of the clones, give me a break. It's a great moment for Crosshair in that he is able to feel like a true member of the Bad Batch again. They start to do their thing, and Crosshair exhibits some pretty cool acrobatics. But ultimately, things don't get very interesting until Tarkin demands the batch be tested with live rounds. This scene gets really fun to watch when you really pay attention to all the things each member of the batch have to bring to the table. I mean, obviously Wrecker has his brute strength, but we also see that Echo is really fast on his feet. And I don't know if it's his prosthetics or whatever, but my man is speedy. He's zooming, and he also gets to use his stomp in a way that's really interesting. And then Tech comes in with his expertise in programming, and then there's Hunter with this knife work, like come on, like excuse me? And then Crosshair, he really doesn't do much.
This is going well.
With his rifle unable to deliver actual lethal blows to the droids, he kind of just scurries around and tries to distract them, which in some instances, like here, is really helpful, but then that's just about it. So when Hunter asks for more cover fire, I think Crosshair takes a moment to really look at what he can do. And lo and behold, he discovers that he still has the ability to act like a Bad Batch member, delivering one of the coolest shots in the entire show. And this moment probably makes him feel an immense sense of relief. He is still part of the Bad Batch. Wrecker's lack of hesitation to just toss his knife with the pure confidence that Crosshair will do something amazing with it goes to show that he was being too paranoid. All those years together can't just be undone by a few moments of uncertainty and doubt.